So, Waite discipuli, we're very excited to have you here for the first TEDx in our very own school. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to the faculty who have supported us in getting this club off the ground. Then, of course, our amazing speakers today who have spent months preparing for this moment. I trust that you'll find that what they have to say is interesting, relevant, and compelling to the whole school community. Good afternoon, and without further ado, this is TEDx TBLS. Our first speaker is Ariana on the value of art.
Have you ever thought about how wet water is? Okay, yeah, you can roll your eyes and chuckle all you want, but when two molecules of water meet, it's pretty cool. And it's probably wet. Okay, so you see the properties of a molecule would rub off of another molecule, and you can get the gist of what I'm saying. Unless you're like a geeky science kid and you caught onto my bluff. But what you do need to know, in summary, is that this is basically what happens when we as people interact with one another. We kind of rub off some stinky little property and we change. Unless you're the kind of person to believe that people never change. Otherwise, you'll know what I mean when I say that art does that to us, but to a much larger scale than we let on to. I mean, when was the last time even the majority, even just half of students raised their hands when asked who wanted to pursue the arts in their future? Without the eyes of people shaming them, without the degrading words of parents disencouraging passions to be embraced, without the constant snare look of teachers, the look of pity of what people like to consider a kid. A kid reaching for just dreams that will always stay like that. Dreams. And luckily for you, I'm not a pessimistic person. So if you're here for an angsty, depressed art kid story, I suggest you play perhaps before your eyes, but listen as well. Because the reality is that students pursuing their dreams in the arts can be a bit more depressing to hear than we'd care to notice. To quote a fellow student, you need to be rich, privileged, and have connections to do anything with an art degree. So I don't want people to be in debt and not to be able to pay it off, you know? And truth be it, that's a fair opinion. A 2019 survey from Bankrate showed that drama and theater arts, visual and performing arts, and fine arts were among the three least valuable majors. Among them, the lowest median income was $32,000, with the highest unemployment rate being 5.2%. For comparison, in case you don't know what those numbers mean either, the most valuable college major was naval architecture and marine engineering, with a median income of $90,000 and an unemployment rate of 1.6%. We live in a society, and while that's a joke, the unsupportive social atmosphere around the arts truly isn't, especially to those who do decide to dedicate their lives to it. I mean, I've loved the arts since I could remember. I mean, sure, drawing a turkey using the outline of my hand might not seem so significant to you, but the arts were all around me, from pre-K to high school, and yet it wasn't ever an option to even begin to consider as higher education. It never really piqued my interest why it wasn't so popular. This thing that is so freaking cool and so cool to look at from a distance, but much more to actually be able to touch and to experience yourself. It really crashed down when I met with this music majors professor from a college I can't really seem to remember, but I had the pleasure of meeting with him for the first time. And normally, when you're stuck with a one-on-one teacher conference, you'd probably flee, or I don't really know, but staying in a Zoom call with them for like half an hour really isn't the first option for a kid with anxiety. But I was never one to give up so easily, and so we kind of talked. And it's weird, college workshops are meant to be all cheery and full of toxic enthusiasm, and the persuasive words of waste your money here would probably stick to your head. But this old white guy had just an exhausted look on his face. And if I'm being honest, I kind of felt the need to pity him. So what's up with this random teacher guy? And I think the truth is that he's gotten used to it. The blatant looks of pity, the disencouraging words, the lack of interest and pursuit in an area of life that clearly we have come to enjoy in the shows we watch and the street art that colors our streets, yet reject when it comes to a profession. And how could that be any sadder? Dedicating your entire life's work to the creation of joy, your work having given joy to others, but is still yet to earn its respect in the social sphere. So yeah, pursuing the arts, it's not easy, kids. But the behavior and perspective we hold about others doing so, about that little voice in your head that maybe says, hey, this sounds really fun, how we deal with it shouldn't be as hard as we have made it out to be. I sure as heck don't hold a magic solution to the troubles of the world, much less to this issue that I bring before you. And I sure as heck won't tell you to dedicate your life to the arts, especially if it's not something that interests you. I mean, you've heard statistics, you've heard the stigma that the artists experience, and I'm not going to tell you to face that. All I can really guide you to do is to meet with other molecules, to dabble into the arts, to change the impending crisis on the future of not just art, but of future generations, first with yourself and then with others. To create change in how the industry addresses and credits artists, because art has not only helped record history, but has made history as well. But before all of that, we have to change the way we all independently and subconsciously support artists, especially in our own communities. Thank you.
Next is Elkin on the meaning of life.
Hello, everyone. Like Amita just introduced me, I'm going to talk about something very, very simple. I'm sure you've all thought about this before. Yeah, what's the meaning of life? As I said, it's actually not a very easy question to answer. The discussion of the question of the meaning of life, it's one that's been talked about for centuries. Anyone ranging from Greek philosophers to me, of course, a teen who has way too much time on his hands and likes to overthink things. I've pondered what the question might be, or what the answer might be, rather. And I recently came upon the idea, or rather the realization, that the real question should not be, why are we here? But rather, why do we need a reason to be? Now, let me tell you how I came up with this conclusion. Charles Darwin proposed the theory of evolution, where man evolved from monkey and so on. He explained that this process is a result of a change in a creature's environment that makes it so that said creature has to make a change and survive, or it can also stay the same and die out. Now, I'm of the belief that we're in a constant state of mental and personal evolution. We want to better ourselves, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. Some of us want to reach a specific point, and others are not yet sure what they want to do with their lives. But either way, we're all moving towards something, whether it be, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to get a burger at 6 p.m. today. I'm really hungry. But without a purpose, there's no change. There's no need for personal evolution. Think back to the dinosaurs. They were trying to survive long before the asteroid hit the Earth. But once it did, the circumstances of survival changed, and they were forced to adapt to these new conditions. I believe that the same idea can apply to humans. If there's no point to life, then there's no reason to change. There's no reason to evolve. When we enter a new environment, like I'm here right now, I might be feeling anxious, maybe excited, a little nervous, amongst other things. This is our mind's way of adapting to the situation. We evolve like that, in a matter of seconds. However, in a world where refrigerated food, shelter, safety, and entertainment are at one's reach, there's no longer a purpose for humanity. We've kind of reached the pinnacle of comfort and therefore feel empty and dull. What was once a daily struggle, such as obtaining a meal or a safe place to sleep has now become an everyday commodity for us. There's no longer a need for intellectual evolution. Why change or fix something that's not broken? And so we start getting to our 9-to-5 jobs, our daily commutes, our routines, but it's not long until a feeling of emptiness appears, a primal need for something more. We require a purpose. We ask ourselves for a meaning of life because without it, we believe ourselves to be nothing, just another cog in the system. If you're a fan of The Office, you may know the famous quote by Creed Bratton. If I can't scuba, then what's this all been about? What have I been working towards? During a discussion, and I believe he's present today, at least I hope so, about this very same topic, he proposed a rather nihilistic idea that life has no meaning, and therefore there's really no point to anything. He believed that because we're nothing but specks in a grand and almost infinite universe, we don't really matter. And by connection, neither do our actions. That's kind of depressing. And however, I do agree with this claim to an extent. It's my own belief that humanity is inherently egocentric, and you can feel free to disagree with that. Most of us, I admit myself as well, sometimes usually go on about our day without caring for the well-being of other people. We kind of believe ourselves to be a main character in a video game in which nothing else matters, as long as we ourselves go to sleep with a full stomach. In a sense, this is our subconscious way of protecting us from going down a rabbit hole of confusion and sadness. We reach a realization that not only are we one person from 7.6 billion, but we're also less significant than a speck of dust when thinking about ourselves on a universal scale. Due to this selfishness, we have intellectually evolved into this mentality and way of being. Throughout history, and I'm guessing you can recall a few from earlier this year, there have been countless lives lost over pointless wars and conflicts in order to defend arbitrary borders and ideals that in reality are different ways of saying the same thing. All of these things try to solve the same fundamental question of why are we here? But almost all of them distract us from the real answer, or rather the question of, does it matter? While I'm tempted to say something along the lines of, it does, or it doesn't, I can just get out of here and it's that simple. However, it's a bit more complicated than that. In our own egocentric nature, we ourselves assign meaning to our own existence. Our purpose can range from, I'm here to save the world, versus I'm here to destroy it and tear it down. But because we don't conform with patterns, we either eventually reach that meaning and reach what you may call happiness, or we don't. We give up, but we reassign ourselves to something else. Now, I say happiness, as even those that reach their goals on their purpose of life are not yet happy. I'm realizing that this is a little bit confusing, so let me give you an example. Think expectations versus reality. We set up ourselves for failure on purpose. We'll never be truly happy because we don't want to be. There's always the question of what else is there for me? My goal in life is, heck, let me say an engineer, a politician, an aviator. Fine, the supreme leader of a nation. I rule the world. I'm here. I reached my goals. I met my expectations. And yet there's something missing. We realize that we want more. It's not the world anymore. Now it's the universe. There's not a single answer to the meaning of life, because if there was, then paradoxically, once one reaches it, there's no longer a meaning to life anymore. We're back in square one. Life is fluid. It's beautiful. It truly, truly is a beautiful thing. So does it really make sense to look for a solid answer? Thank you.
Next is Lucia on beauty standards.
Imagine this. You're scrolling through social media. A mindless montage of random information, funny videos, and content from any subject area you could possibly imagine until you happen upon a picture of someone who you find undeniably attractive. The rational part of your brain tells you all the cliche phrases you've heard 1,000 times before. Social media is fake. Intelligence and character are what truly matter. Beauty is subjective. But in truth, you've in some small way allowed this curated image to become a source of your insecurities and visual evidence of a seemingly impossible standard that has conquered your perception of beauty. How can she look like that? Why don't I? This scenario for many people, including myself, is nothing difficult to imagine, but rather acts as a standard component of everyday life. For centuries, women in particular have fallen victim to a beauty standard that is impossible to obtain. While social media's proliferation of images and ideals have intensified the problem, even those living before the digital age were constantly bombarded by advertisements and propaganda that told them that they must look a certain way. But have we ever stopped to really ask ourselves, what is the beauty standard? And the answer to that all depends. In ancient Greece, men were the measure of all things. The power exemplified by a gleaming, muscular appearance was an ideal state that women could not physically meet, and so they were often referred to as disfigured men. Still, women looked to the goddess Aphrodite, characterized by her round face, large breasts, and pear-shaped body as a more achievable facade. Bigger women represented wealth, a status high enough to afford food, and red-headed women were considered the epitome of beauty. Helen of Troy, described by Greek mythology as the most beautiful woman in the world, had ginger hair. This was only the start to centuries of an ever-changing standard that became increasingly unattainable by natural means. During the Han Dynasty, the Chinese beauty standard valued white skin, which was associated with cleanliness and class. Women often painted their faces using white powder in order to achieve this highly desired look. Above all, the attractiveness of small feet characterized this era in such a way that young women bound their feet to prevent them from growing, causing extreme disfiguration. The result was a foot no longer than 3 to 4 inches. Imagine that. Such an extreme sacrifice for the arbitrary illusion of beauty, and yet it only got worse from here. During the Italian Renaissance, the most sought-after feature was the hourglass figure. Paintings from this era depict voluptuous women with small waists, fair skin, big breasts, and full-body hairlessness. Their means of achieving many of these attributes were quite dangerous, including the use of chemical compounds to lighten skin and remove body hair, which often led to harmful skin burns and eye infections. The extreme nature of these methods ultimately began to convert the beauty standard from something requiring effort to something requiring sacrifice in order to appear desirable and feminine. And nothing better exemplifies this than the legacy of the Victorian tapeworm era. This time period was notorious for the oddity of its beauty standards, including pale skin, rosy cheeks and lips, and of course a slim, frail-looking figure. Their methods of achieving this figure, however, were even more bizarre. Often women would swallow ammonia, bathe in arsenic, or use figure molding corsets that caused the displacement of ribs and other internal trauma to achieve a small waist. Despite this, the Victorian tapeworm diet is arguably the most appalling of these methods. The process entailed a woman swallowing a pill which contained a tapeworm egg. This egg would then hatch and ideally eat the food that their host consumes. Even though this may seem grotesque to us as contemporaries, the attitude toward this horrendous act during the time was simply, it is a woman's business to be beautiful, a sentiment that we have allowed to plague our society for centuries. In this capacity, it is obvious that impossible beauty standards stretched across various culture, periods of time, and places, and there was never once a uniform idea of beauty, or even a lasting one, that was worth making such extreme sacrifices for. Yet, we have still allowed these fleeting trends to dictate our ideas of beauty and self-worth, and there is no better example of this than America itself, the place where all of these various cultures blend into an entirely unique version of beauty that becomes most clear as we look at the different decades in the 1900s. From the androgyny that characterized the Roaring '20s, through Marilyn Monroe's golden age of Hollywood, to the frail bodies of the '90s and 2000s, these time periods were extremely unique, characterized by vastly different ideas of beauty that were constantly changing and evolving. Now, in our present world, it seems that the Kardashian-Jenners, slim with exaggerated curves and largely supplemented by surgical enhancements and virtual edits, have become our new measure of beauty. Their posts are the ones you stop and compare yourselves to. Their bodies are the ones you envy, And yet, they too are victims of an unachievable standard. Just recently, an unedited picture of Khloe Kardashian went viral on the internet. And in order to prevent anyone from seeing this uncurated, unposed image, Khloe Kardashian's legal team copyrighted every person who posted, spread, or shared the picture. I mean, think about that. Social media has created such an impossible standard to reach that even those we use as a reference for that standard cannot measure up to it. And so it is worth considering, is our modern beauty standard even possible to achieve? Is it even worth achieving? The only thing we can know for sure is that the world constantly changes its mind about what constitutes the beauty standard. And shouldn't that tell us that we should take everything with a grain of salt? If our ideas of beauty are ever changing and fleeting, why should we assign them any sort of value? The only way to combat this oppressive practice is to continue to resist a fickle standard that has only ever harmed us, and truly, it does not deserve to. So the next time you're scrolling through Instagram and feel even a twinge of negativity, remember that beauty has always been subjective, and that's why our ideas of it have changed so drastically over time. The less you buy into the beauty standard, the less power it will have over us all. Thank you.
Next is Justin on cancel culture.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Williams, and I'm not going to waste your time, so let's get straight into it. Cancel culture. What do you call it when a person gets expelled from society, faces relentless public humiliation, and is permanently subject to stigma surrounding their existence unless they have overwhelming evidence of their innocence? That's the system of cancel culture that we have in place. And I've seen a lot of video commentators on YouTube express their hatred of cancel culture by referencing celebrities or public figures who've been canceled online. Familiar names such as Ellen DeGeneres, J.K. Rowling, Shane Dawson, and Dr. Seuss in the eyes of some people. People have usually used celebrities to make their points as to why cancel culture is bad, but I want to argue something different. And I'm not arguing that cancel culture is good. The main argument I want to highlight here is that the biggest victims of cancel culture aren't public figures or big corporations, but the average person. The biggest victims are people like you and me. The first reason why cancel culture's biggest victims are just average people is because we often don't have the financial resources or the huge social following to recover from a cancellation. Take Natasha Tynes, who was an immigrant woman that tweeted about a DC Metro worker eating under the assumption that she was exposing the hypocrisy of the Metro system after she was criticized by them for eating on their trains. Now, the tweet itself, it was a mistake on her end. Her decision to take a photo of the worker too was nosy, even with her intentions. And Natasha even said she only thought of the tweet for about 20 seconds while she was writing it, and she deleted it and half an hour later after she sent it. But the backlash she received over this tweet was far disproportionate to what the tweet itself even warranted. People assumed she was being racist because she screenshotted a person of color in the photo. So naturally, she was met with very non-hypocritical responses, such as being called a terrorist, a plane bomber, a radical Muslim, constantly being sent death threats, and all of this despite not actually having racist intentions. In a podcast with Sharon Pearson I found online, she says that she wasn't familiar with the concept of race coming from the country of Jordan. And she says, quote, "As if they never knew me, I was accused of systemic racism. I was like, hey, can somebody please explain to me what's going on here? It just broke me." And as if the racial torment and death threats weren't bad enough, her book, They Called Me White, was dropped by her publisher right before its release, even after Natasha worked 5 years on it because of the backlash to her tweets. Now, this just brings me back to my original point that cancel culture's biggest victims are average people, because regardless of the context, no employer wants to take on the liability of someone who's just been canceled. And if you're just a regular person, it's so much more likely that you don't have the money or notoriety to compensate for your canceled status in the eyes of these businesses. Now, Natasha's story sort of has a small redemption arc. Another publisher, Rebler, actually published her book, but in the eyes of Natasha, who grew up in the Middle East, who survived 2 Gulf Wars, quote, in her words, "This was the most difficult thing I ever went through, and it scarred me permanently. I think about it every single day." The other reason I have as to why cancel culture is worse for the average person is because there's no accountability on the ends of those canceling people. The lack of accountability in cancel culture is already a primary reason as to why it's so destructive, but it just hits those without a huge social following all the more harder. You probably know Doja Cat, and you may remember she was remembered last year. She was canceled last year for allegedly being in alt-right chat rooms with racist incels. Although it was later disproven, and she was gradually uncanceled by the general public, and you can pretty much tell because no one ever brings it up anymore. You could definitely make a larger point out of that, how cancel culture has created this system where you're immediately guilty unless you have indisputable evidence that proves you're not guilty, and that evidence gets accepted by the general public. But what I want you to take away here is something else. Unless you're someone famous like Doja Cat, the possibility of being uncanceled doesn't even exist for us. And God forbid that you learn from your cancellation, or even worse, you are falsely accused over an accusation like this girl on Tumblr who was accused of blackface, even though she was just a black person. People who cancel others aren't obligated to truly care about a situation. They aren't obligated to truly have self-examination to see if they made the same mistakes. And they aren't obligated to have self-accountability for wrongly canceling someone. All this means is that cancel culture is even worse for those of us without a public platform, because we're robbed of the slight chance that we have of our names being cleared by the general public because we aren't famous enough to let it be known by the general public. And the chance that we have of the general public even caring about our innocence or potential change is already diminished. All in all, I may actually get the surface level appeal of cancel culture. There is catharsis in seeing people aired out on the internet, but we just see them being absolutely terrible human beings. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that cancel culture is a complete failure in inspiring greater societal change. Because even if you can cancel people, you can never cancel ideas. It's borderline impossible to truly kill someone's beliefs with just shame and scare tactics. And infuriating ideas like racism or homophobia will never truly go away as a result of cancel culture. There's way more you can dissect about cancel culture that I just glossed over in this speech, but my main point here is that cancel culture's biggest threat is to normal people. Celebrities may be the easiest people to target, but regular people without a mass following are the easiest to cancel. Thank you.
Last is Mita on gratitude.
Give thanks is a benevolent phrase, the guiding principle to many the wellness journey. The positive effects of a grateful lifestyle are well-founded. A 2002 study found that those who were grateful were more socially, spiritually, and emotionally well. A 2006 study found that those who showed gratitude for people would help them were more likely to go to greater lengths to return the favor. And a 2010 study, which assessed gratitude in individuals through their transition from high school to college, found that more grateful students were less stressed, depressed, and more supported in their communities. These studies and many others report positive associations between gratitude and general emotional and social well-being. But what else do they have in common? For one, these studies have no means of proving that well-being is a consequence of gratitude. In fact, it makes sense that those who are doing well have more to be grateful for. Something that these studies don't take into consideration. On the other hand, it tracks that those more stressed, depressed, and unsupported people, like some of the college students in the 2010 study, have less to be grateful for. But let's focus on how gratitude can improve your life. A very tangible effect of gratitude is sociability. When you express your gratitude for another person, you're connecting with them in a very deep, positive way. Even if you're just reflecting on your gratitude internally, you're thinking back to social experiences, or even more generally, yourself in relation to others. Hundreds of studies have established that social connectedness is critical to good mental health, a truth and a pattern that most of us can notice in our own lives. My concern is that there also seems to be a new trend promoting gratitude as a sort of single key to self-improvement. A Google search for gratitude yields endless articles about incorporating gratitude into your life. And I'm sure many of you have noticed the increase in internet articles, wellness courses, and Instagram posts, promoting gratitude journaling and similar rituals. Most of these rituals encourage thinking patterns that frequently reflect on experiences and highlight the good, ideally making this a habit or an instinct. They use gratitude to acknowledge the positive and to combat negativity bias. The idea is that there will always be opportunities for gratitude. After all, there's always someone who's had it worse than us. But this expectation can trigger shame when we don't feel good. We've all heard about how it's normal to not feel 100% of the time. But when trying to achieve a sort of perfect, grateful mindset, it's harder for us to extend that understanding to others, to ourselves, excuse me. For those of us feeling pressured to practice these gratitude rituals, this may lead to thinking about privilege. Phrases like, I am so grateful that I have food on my plate. Should you be? The obvious answer is that yes, you should, that there was tremendous effort on the part of countless other people to get food to your plate. But if the benefits of gratitude are reaped through an elevated social consciousness, why should you be grateful that other people worked for you to be able to eat? It wasn't an act of benevolence. They don't even know you. Working is possibly their only means of survival, and for the good of them and for their families, they had to work. In the fields, harvesting your produce, in factories, packaging, all for meager wages and labor violations. There is no benefit to expressing gratitude for basic needs. It's no positive thing that others have it worse than you, and the people who work for you to have what you have are receiving nothing from your gratitude. In this case, gratitude arguably cultivates ignorance through the casual and probably unconscious acceptance of injustice. For some, intentional gratitude provides purpose. For others, a way to prioritize empathy. Whatever gratitude means to you and however you practice it, continue to reflect on yourself and your principles, both critically and positively. Maybe strive for empathy instead. Understanding others teaches us exactly how we can be the best person that we can be. Gratitude will follow. Thank you.
All right, that's all, folks. If a speech has changed your perspective, let them know. Show them some love. We appreciate the support you've given us today, and thank you so much for joining us.